Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time we learned about Washington's childhood and his relationship with his big brother Lawrence. Now, he would carve out a life for himself in Virginia. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. Join the Patreon page so you can vote in upcoming polls and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. While Lawrence was on his deathbed, George began to politic for his older brother's position as Adjutant General of Virginia, despite having no prior military experience and being only 20 years old. The governor of Virginia decided to divide up the colony into military districts. Washington was made Adjutant General of the least desirable territory, the one stretching south from the James River to the North Carolina border, then west into the frontier. This was a big disappointment, so much so that George didn't even visit the district for a year and a half after his appointment. In 1753, he would finally get the post he desired, the military district in northern Virginia. Before his brother passed, Lawrence and some of the other planners formed the Ohio Company to take advantage of settlers moving into the frontier. The company received a charter from the King of England for 200,000 acres of land along the Ohio River, with an additional 300 acres of land if they could establish and maintain a fort in the area for 7 years and settle 100 people in that area. A road was blazed and lots of personal wealth invested in the venture, including from the governor of Virginia himself. Britain and France's long rivalry continued into the 18th century. France attempted to extend its reach from its land holdings north of the 13 English colonies. In 1753, France dispatched 1,500 troops to enter the Ohio River Valley south of Lake Erie, with orders to remove all English traders from the territory. Not only did this move threaten land claimed by England, it also threatened the land chartered to men like Washington's brother and the governor of Virginia. The governor told the king what France was doing, and he received word from the monarchy to send an emissary into the Ohio River Valley and inform the French that that land belonged to Britain. If the French didn't immediately remove themselves, Virginia was to drive them off by force of arms. Washington went to Williamsburg to request he be the one responsible for delivering the message to the French, and the 21-year-old Virginian was granted that role. One of Washington's biographers described him as such. At age 21, George Washington was fully grown and standing 6 feet 3 inches tall. He towered above almost every contemporary. He was broad-shouldered with long, muscular arms. His waist was small and flat, though he was rather wide across the hips. He tended to stand ramrod straight on long, solidly developed legs. He moved about in a fluid, agile manner, and word was that he was an excellent, graceful horseman. There was no hint of softness in the youngster's appearance, particularly not in his face. He would not have been thought handsome, but he hardly was unattractive. Instead, people thought they saw a kind of steely toughness in his features. It was in his blue-gray eyes that this quality seemed most pronounced, for he had learned to stare at, almost through, anyone with whom he spoke. Then, too, he seldom spoke, as if to underscore that he was a man of action, not of words. With a letter to be delivered to the French commander from the governor of Virginia, Washington set out for Logstown, a Native American village. There he would get an Algonquin guide. Washington took along his fencing instructor, Jacob von Brom, who had been a lieutenant in the Dutch army. Brom would act as his translator. In total, Washington led a group of 7 men into the back country of the colonies. At Logstown, they procured a few Native American guides who would lead them to the French headquarters. The party reached the fort on December 4th. There, the French officer entertained his guests, but he would direct them north to another fort where a French general was. Now, with 4 French soldiers, Washington's group pushed north, close to Lake Erie. There, Washington met with the French general. The general read the letter from the governor of Virginia, and after a long deliberation, asked Washington if he would travel to Quebec to present it to the governor of Canada. Washington said that that was beyond the scope of his journey, so the general told him that all he could do was send the letter higher up the bureaucratic chain. Washington was satisfied, and he and his men left the French fort. The journey through the harsh weather would be trying for Washington and his little group. They canoed through icy streams, carried those canoes overland to other waterways, and trudged through the bitter cold and 0-degree temperatures. At one point, Washington split up his group, with Washington and Christopher Gist going their own way. Gist was a middle-aged frontiersman who could act as a liaison between the party and Native Americans in the Ohio Valley region. Along their way south, they ran into an Indian who offered to be their guide. The hard journey was particularly difficult on Washington, who now had blisters on his feet that sent great pain throughout his lower extremities with every step. He wanted to stop and make camp, but the Indian guide said that his cabin was nearby, and besides, there were enemy Indians in these woods. The group traveled 2 miles, but there was no cabin. Frustrated, Washington declared that they would make camp right there. The Indian whirled around and shot at Gist, but missed. The 2 men stood there astonished, then grabbed the attacker. Gist wanted to kill him right there, but Washington wouldn't allow it. They disarmed the man and sent him north. The 2 men proceeded south, eventually rafting down an ice-filled creek. Washington would lose his footing and fall into the water. Gist couldn't help him because it was all he could do to keep the vessel from capsizing. Washington was able to hold on in the cold water until Gist maneuvered the raft to an island. From there, they made it to Gist's cabin. Washington would get a horse and proceed home, then to Williamsburg, where he reported to the governor. This entire venture took only a month and a half. The governor was thrilled with Washington's account. The House of Burgesses had met and hadn't included any funding to combat the French, but the governor wagered that if they heard Washington's account, they would have no choice but to allocate funds to defend against the French. Governor Dinwiddie asked Washington to have a recounting of his journey ready for publication by the next afternoon. The young man worked feverishly to put together a detailed account of his journey, and after a quick look-over by Dinwiddie, it was sent to be published. The account was published in American newspapers and even in London. The governor called up 200 militiamen to go to the site that Washington had chosen for a fort on his journey to see the French. Next, he asked for the Burgesses to give him funds to raise 400 additional troops. As the adjutant general of the Northern Neck, Washington was responsible for 100 of those additional 400. Recruitment was slow. Most of these men were rural farmers or planters and didn't want to fight in the Ohio country, so Dinwiddie was forced to lower the number to 300 and offer land bounties for men who served. The governor also named Joshua Fry, a college professor with militia training but no combat experience, as commander. Washington was made a lieutenant colonel and second in command to Fry. When word came to the governor of a French invasion of the Ohio region, he sent Washington ahead without Fry. Washington's little army consisted of 134 ill-trained and poorly equipped militiamen. At Winchester, he gained 25 more men, but he also heard that the French had captured the Virginia fort on the Ohio River. Despite news that at least 1,000 French soldiers were in the region, he pressed on. At the junction of the Redstone Creek and the Monongahela River, Washington, the 22-year-old lieutenant colonel, dealt with a mutiny within his ranks. The officers of his band were upset at the low wages that were drastically lower than the wages of British officers in the Americas. When word came that the House of Burgesses refused to give them a raise, they wrote a letter of protest to Governor Dinwiddie. Washington wouldn't sign the letter, but he would send it to the governor, along with his own letter that stated that he would serve without pay rather than accept this shadow of a pay. As the group pressed on, word came that French soldiers were nearby. Washington, knowing he needed help, went to a local sachem of the Senecas named Half King. He told the Seneca leader that reinforcements were on the way and asked if the Senecas would help. Half King said yes, expressing his hatred for the French, who he claimed had killed, then boiled and eaten his father. Half King arrived at a rendezvous point with only 25 warriors. Disappointed, but still determined, Washington pushed on. One of his Indian scouts reported about 40 French soldiers lounging about not far from their position. Nearly completely encircling the group, Washington's force attacked, capturing over half of them and killing 10. There was only one dead Virginian, with 2 or 3 wounded. Among the dead of the French was its commander, whom France asserted was simply acting as emissary, like Washington had done earlier. The prisoners were sent to Williamsburg, with the suggestion that they would be hanged. Elated at the victory, Washington and his group returned to an area called Great Meadows, unaware that they had stoked the fires of war in the Americas starting the French and Indian War.